And we're going to look at a diagram in just a bit about the types of crosses that were used, including the type that we believe was used during the time of Jesus. And we're going to look at how the hands were nailed to the cross piece and then how the feet were nailed to the vertical piece. The common cross that we all think about and is in all the pictures is called the Latin cross, where the vertical piece goes up above the horizontal piece. But there's a low tau cross, the Greek letter tau. And this is actually believed to be the kind of cross that was most commonly used during the time of Jesus. And what they did was they had this vertical piece called a stipes, and it stayed mounted in the ground all the time at the site where they performed the crucifixions. And then there was a cross piece called a patibulum, and that was actually the mobile part of it. And they would actually make the prisoner carry the patibulum. They would tie it to his arms, make him carry it through the streets. And a Roman soldier would walk in front of him and carry up a sign, and on that sign would be listed the crimes that the person was accused of committing. They would parade through the streets, and then they would get out there and perform the crucifixion on Golgotha. There actually was a mortise and tenon joint here that allowed this to slip down onto a notch and remain in place, and so that's how we believe that Jesus was likely crucified. Even though you see in this picture Jesus wearing this purple robe, it was common and almost all the time the prisoner was naked. And it's just more of the humiliation and more of the not only mental anguish to go along with the physical anguish that the person was suffering. And as I mentioned earlier, this cross piece weighed between 75 and 125 pounds, so we would believe that Jesus would be able to carry that. And I think it was the intensity of his flogging which made that impossible for him to carry. Now, this shows you how we believe that the hands, in quotes, were nailed to the patibulum. First of all, the nail itself, and I always carry around this railroad spike to just give you some idea of the size of nail we're talking about. The length is about the same as the railroad spike. It wasn't quite as big around. It was a little more tapered and came down to a sharper point. But that's about the size of the nails that we're talking about. We believe there are a lot of reasons why the nail was actually driven through the wrist and not the palm of the hand. The first reason is there's an arterial arch that goes through the palm of the hand where the ulnar and radial arteries come together. And if you drive a nail through the palm of the hand, you might get a lot of pretty brisk arterial bleeding. And the person might bleed to death in just a few minutes. And the idea was to keep them up there on the cross and let them suffer for as long as possible. So it would kind of defeat the purpose if somebody bled out from arterial bleeding. The other more important reason is the weight of an adult man is not supportable by driving a nail through the wrist because the bones of the fingers don't have any cross bones. There's just some ligaments there. And if you suspend the weight of an adult man with a nail driven through the palm of the hand, the palms will simply rip out through the flesh and it won't sustain the weight. So that's why we believe, and experts believe, that these nails were actually driven through the wrists. Now there's a couple of important anatomy issues here that we can talk about. First is, if you look right through the center of the wrist, there's a large nerve that's called the median nerve. And when you drive this nail through the wrist, you're almost certainly either going to crush that nerve severely or even sever that nerve, cut it completely in two. Now, what's this feel like? Well, you all know about what we commonly call the crazy bone here at the inside of the elbow. If you've ever hit that really, really hard on something, you feel this sort of searing, kind of burning electrical kind of pains that shoot down your arm and into your little finger. Well, now imagine actually crushing that nerve with a nail or else severing that nerve completely in two. You just get these intense, burning, shooting electrical pains. And you'll see later how important that is in relation to crucifixion. Now, here's how we believe the feet were nailed to the cross. They would rotate both feet vertically like this and then drive the nail between two of the metatarsals in the middle part of the foot into the stipes. Now, there are several nerves similar to the hand in this area. One's called the deep perineal nerve, and you're going to get the same effect. You're going to either crush that nerve or you're going to sever the nerve in two, and it also would cause these intense, searing, burning, electrical type pains shooting up both legs. Now let's look at the medical aspects of crucifixion. What does all this mean, and what are the physical effects that happen? What they would do is, after they would nail the hands or the wrists to the cross-piece, they would lift it up on to the vertical piece and then nail the feet as we described. The first thing I want to talk about is hypovolemic shock. And in Jesus' case, I believe this would have been mostly from the flogging. Hypovolemic means low volume or decreased volume of the amount of blood that's flowing through the vascular system. So when you have a lot of intense bleeding, as Jesus did from his back, then you're going to get what's known as hypovolemic shock. And in hypovolemic shock, basically you get dizzy, you get a rapid heartbeat, you're weak, and frequently you will faint or pass out. So we know that that was likely the state that Jesus was in at the time he was crucified. Now I'm going to show you a diagram in a minute about what's called paradoxical respiration to give you an idea of the respiratory patterns that happen when someone is crucified, and it's unique, and it actually is what causes the death on the cross. Exhaustion asphyxia, which means you get to the point where you're so weak that you can't breathe anymore, and that's really what causes the death. And also, it's common to get collections of fluid around the heart and between the lungs and the chest wall called pleural and pericardial effusions, and I'll show you a diagram a little bit later of what that looks like. And then we'll talk a little bit about the spear wound in the side, which actually didn't cause Jesus' death because the Scripture clearly says he was already dead when that happened. But we'll take a look at that. Now let's look at this paradoxical respiration. It's interesting when you suspend the weight of an adult man with his arms up over his head, what it does is it stretches out the muscles of the chest wall and it draws the chest into an expanded condition. In the normal state, when you breathe, when you're relaxed, your chest wall is relaxed, and then when you want to breathe in, you expand the chest, draw air into your lungs, and then when you relax, the air comes out. When you're suspended in the way a crucified victim is, it's just the opposite. Your chest is expanded, so you have air in your chest without any effort, and in order to exhale or to breathe out, it takes effort to be able to squeeze your chest together. And in the case of someone on a cross, you have to pull up with your arms, push up with your feet to be able to exhale. So if you begin to think about that, you think about pulling up with both hands. Every time you pull up, you're getting these intense, searing, shooting pains up both arms from a median nerve injury. You're getting the same thing up both legs from the deep perineal nerve injury. And you're pushing up with the feet on the nail. You're pulling up with both wrists. And you're doing this every time you exhale. And then not only that, but Jesus' back was entirely raw from the flogging. So you're rubbing that raw flesh against this wooden, rough, vertical piece, stipes that's mounted in the ground. And that's with every breath.